Recording. It may have asked you to give permission for that. If it didn't when you first logged in, it might ask you again. Anyway, so thank you all for being here. I greatly appreciate it. This is our class called CALM. It's a class about money. CALM stands for Cash and Liability Mastery. And this is a class that I've been wanting to do for years and years and years. Cal, my partner, knows that I talk about this stuff all the time, but we finally kind of got it in a class format. And I'm excited to kind of get it out in the world. So thank you for being my inaugural group, if you can believe it. So let me get this up here going, ready to go. All right. Got the screen, everyone can see me okay? See the screen?
Yes.
Some feedback, perfect, thank you.
See it perfectly.
All right, great. I don't think you need to see me, so I'm gonna take myself off there. Well, good. So again, I'm John Thompson. For those of you who don't know me, I think I know everyone though. My partner, Cal Anton, is here as well. And I've been in the mortgage business for 32 years. And this subject I've been talking about for, I think, 15 years. And you'd really call this maybe a kind of a passion project for me over time. So all these ideas got exposed by a mentor of mine back in 2004. Ultimately, these concepts were moved into an organization called the National Institute of Financial Education, or NIFE for short, which is a national nonprofit. We still run that nonprofit. I'm a faculty member there and a member of the organization, but my mentor is the one that really runs the group and so forth. And so we've sort of rebirthed it and are pushing more information out into the world, and you'll see more of it over the next year or two. So this class is really not about budgeting. It's not about deprivation. It's really a perspective, a new perspective, hopefully, on how maybe you can live your life in a different way. You can achieve a higher level of personal fulfillment by achieving a financial state that we call calm. And you get that by learning really how to master cash flow and liabilities. I am going to ask, if anyone is willing to unmute themselves and share, is there maybe one thing that you came to the class with today that you thought you'd hoped to get out of it today? Why did you show up? Anyone willing to share a thing or two?
I came just because I want to learn how to handle my money, learn how to utilize it better, and just to see if there's any information I can help to just build my cash flow, and just learn about money and how to manage money more. So I don't know. That's
great. Well, thank you, Lena. Tisha, did you want to say something, or are you just clapping because it's a great start?
Well, I first waved, but now I'm just raising my hand. No, I did want to say something. It actually sounds a lot very similar to what she just said, but as we get more money, sometimes we tend to spend it more readily. And so I'm kind of like, okay, how can I hone it in and really put it to good, smart use? That's kind of where I'm at right now.
I think that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. And we are going to absolutely talk about both those things and talk about the dynamic of earnings going up over time and spending, and maybe some other thoughts on how to balance it to achieve more fulfillment and financial freedom, which is, I think, something that most people strive for and want to achieve. So let's go ahead and get going here. So no single conversation can be guaranteed to change the trajectory of a career, a company, a relationship, or a life, but any single conversation really can. And the reason I share this is because we don't know when that conversation is going to happen, right? We could be walking down the street and have a conversation that completely changes our world. And I don't know that this will be this for you, but maybe it will be. And maybe if you share with other people, it might be life-changing for them as well. So thank you. Let's just start talking about what is money. So there's really three elements of money that are important to understand about money. Number one, it has to be a store of value. So it means you got to store some kind of value. So when we work is valuable. You get value for your work, and then you ideally get something in exchange for that work, and you store it, and then you can use that money or that value later on, right? So it's got to be a store of value. There's got to be, number two, a unit of account. So what do I mean by unit of account? So let's say that I have a $20 bill, and you want to buy a $4 cup of coffee, right? So I give you the $20, and what am I going to get back? I'm going to get back the $16. So we've agreed on the unit of account, and that's kind of what it has to be as well. So unit of account's the second thing. The third is really medium of exchange. So for something to actually be considered money, there has to be some sort of an agreement about what we can exchange it for. And we have to agree on the value together. We have to be willing to accept whatever this money is in order to get something else for it. So this exchange, the paper money that we deal with, well, not so much anymore, but the idea of dollar bills and 20s and hundreds and so forth is actually relatively new. In other cultures and over societies, money was something else, and it has been for eons and eons. So if we think about stuff like this, you see our little man over here on the top right, kind of the thinking guy, and that's sort of our clue or our moment just to pause and maybe reflect and kind of think about what's being discussed on the slide. And maybe these are some of your goals, and just think about these kinds of things. Maybe we want to reduce stress around money, have more clarity around money, feel more in control and empowered about money, get out of debt, for a lot of people that's important, live within my means and develop savings. Maybe it's connect with a greater meaning and purpose in my life. Then the overall question is, what would you like to learn about money? And we had a couple answers earlier, so thank you. So what do you call money? You may not know this. So the Eskimos have between 50 and 100 names for snow. Right, so here's a couple in the top right. Fine snow, snow on the ground, fresh snow, a snow bank. These are all different names in the Eskimo tongue for snow. So you know that if they have 100 names for something, it's pretty important in their culture and in their society. So I did a Google search for what's money called in our culture, in our society. There's over 300 names for money. So I grabbed a bunch of them, put them in this little infographic, and maybe you recognize some of these things, right? So cabbage, dead presidents, Benji clams, lettuce, greenbacks, bacon, ducats, bucks, all these kinds of dinero, right? So kind of interesting. So we have, almost 300 names for money. So that tells you a little bit about what's important to our society, right? So money is important because we obviously have lots of different names for it. So money's on our mind quite a bit, and maybe too much at times to think about it. But we spend a lot of time and energy kind of think about money and considering money. And by understanding our relationship to money, maybe we can get some of that time and energy kind of back. So we're thinking about things like, how do we get money? Where do we spend it? How do we save it? Where do we save it? How's it taxed? Will we have enough money? And there's probably lots of other things that are on your mind all the time, but these are just kind of things to be aware, again, that we have money on our mind. What is money universally? Money really is something we trade our life energy for. What's our life energy? Our life energy is just the things that we're going through. It's time for the most part. So you pay for money with your time, then you choose how to spend your money. So when you tell someone to pay attention, you're asking for their undivided attention. They're going to give you their time, their energy, and they're going to focus on what you're about to tell them. So that's paying attention. We call it that for a reason, right? So even a student that maybe isn't getting paid money, they're giving their time to learn something to hopefully earn money later on. So money is something we trade our life energy for. So life energy really is time, and it's precious, right? Because it's limited. We have really no idea how much time we have. And we oftentimes say, well, if we're managing time, then really you're managing money. And at the end of the day, our life energy is our life energy, and you get to determine what money is worth to you, because of course it's your life energy. We're gonna talk a little bit about now your money story. And everyone has a money story. The money story comes from lots of different areas of our life, our parents and our culture, our society. We're gonna talk about maybe some of those things that are impacting you. And I love this quote: "People do not desire to be rich, only to be richer than other people," by John Stuart Mill. So most of our evaluations are in comparison to someone else. You certainly may feel quite wealthy until you run into someone who's got a really big yacht and a bunch of mansions all around, right? And then suddenly you don't feel quite so rich, and maybe you're envious, or maybe you're not. Maybe you're just how you affect it if you're thinking about it. But then maybe you're walking down the street with a friend after a lunch, and you see a homeless person on the side of the road, and suddenly you feel pretty blessed to be where you're at. Right, so it's all about perspective, our perspective on how we view things, and the degree that we can become aware of how we view these things, we can maybe make better choices about our money. So again, it's all about perspective. So money is made in really 4 different ways. We call these the factors of production. So where does kind of money come from, and how is it produced? So in the past, more money came from the land, and if we think about where land, and it still does, Land is really things like natural resources. It's farming, timber, fishing. It's where you're using the land to make money. Then we move into labor, right? The Industrial Revolution and other things like that. This is human beings doing work. And it can start very early, right? You could be in junior high school and having a paper route, and that's doing work and exchanging your time for some money, right? And then maybe you're babysitting, and then maybe moving in college, you have a part-time job, and then you move into a full-time job, and so forth, in a career. And that's that word, that JOBS word. Whoops. And then we kind of move into entrepreneurship. Now, entrepreneurship is different in that typically involves a level of risk. It's still human beings doing work, so it's work, but now it's risk involved. Typically, entrepreneurship is done by people who are self-employed. So it may include labor, and it's kind of the difference between being an employee who gets paid W-2 from a different company, as opposed to being an independent contractor and doing work for yourself. And lastly, we have capital. And capital is money or property that supports land, labor, and entrepreneurship. This is things like investing in land or businesses or people or buying companies. We think of venture capital. But at the end of the day, all that's really going back into land, labor, and entrepreneurship. And ideally, that's money that makes money. And hopefully it's a virtuous circle out there. Doesn't always work that way, but hopefully that's what it is. So we want to think a little bit about what our money story really is. And again, we're going to kind of encourage you to kind of pause and think, where have the influences in your life come from that influence your money story? We think about it over 4 different levels. We have the street level. So the street level is our practical use of money. How do we feel about it? Do we use cash or credit cards to buy our lunch? Do we carry cash with us? Do we go to the ATM? It's just a daily use and practical application of money around us. Next, we kind of move into the neighborhood level. And these are our thoughts and our opinions about money. Does it give us security? Does it give us power? Are we accepted in society because of the money we have? It's a money story. The influences here tend to be our parents, maybe our teachers, maybe our grandparents, mentors, it's our friends, it's people around us. If you're a trust fund baby, you may think very differently around money than maybe a first-generation person heading off to college, right? So that's your neighborhood level. The city level is more of a cultural view, right? So depending on where you live in a city, there may be different viewpoints on money in the southern part of the United States that are on the West Coast, or the northern parts, or rural cities versus big cities, those types of things. So people have shared beliefs, it's value to some other people and so forth. I want you to think about also, going backwards a little bit, just those conversations around the dinner table you have with family, the things that are said at the dinner table that influence the other people at the table and so forth, or the things that aren't said, that are never asked, really interesting type of stuff. Then we have the world level. And when you think about the world level, you're thinking about things like the economy. We hear news stories about inflation. We hear about bubbles and these big economic kind of things. And are we responsible for other countries? Do we take our money and do we use it to do good or evil in other places? And so this is the world level. All these things are interplaying and interacting every single day on our decisions around what we do with money. Again, all we're really trying to point out here is awareness. Be aware these things are impacting you every single day. We're going to talk about quality of life. So QOL stands for quality of life. And there's an interesting study that showed that income that made people the happiest was right around $95,000 annual for US household. And at some point, income at some point doesn't provide any additional happiness. And it's kind of interesting to think about this. And you'll see kind of this chart over here as it goes up and each one peaks. And it really depends on what you think is important in your quality of life. Someone that drives a super nice car, that wants to have great clothes, all those kind of things, may have a very different higher number than someone else because that's what influences their lifestyle. And maybe that's important to them. Then you have other people, maybe think of people like teachers or healthcare workers whose fulfillment comes from helping other people or helping society. Their quality of life income might be lower because they're not expecting to have those other things that might be important to someone else. And I don't know what it is for you. But just kind of think about where's your real quality of life. At some point, too much money doesn't provide a whole lot of additional quality of life. We're going to move into the next section, which is really managing cash flow. And think about it this way. If you work for someone, think of the money you earn, each dollar you earn, as employees that work for you. So if you're already an employee and you don't have other employees, your money is going to work for you. And that's a good thing. we asked the question, and this is part of the homework you're going to do, hopefully later on at the end of this class, that to determine what's your lifetime earnings. And you'll see in this chart, going back, our lifespans were relatively low throughout this entire period. Rome, medieval times, pre-Columbian, early 20th century, and then of course it suddenly took off as improvements in healthcare and all these other kind of things. What's interesting about this now is that they say that studies are now showing that for every additional year of life that we live right now, you're going to pick up another 3 months extra because of the improvements in healthcare, diet, all those sorts of things are going to help us live longer and longer and longer. If you're in college or in your early 20s, the reality is you're probably going to live well into your hundreds right now. And even if you're in your 50s and 60s, there's a good chance you're going to live, close to 100, 85, 95 years. It would be very common these days. So we're going to ask the question, what is your lifetime earnings? And, oops. And what will you have to show for your lifetime earnings? So typically people work maybe about a 45-year career. And again, I want you this is a moment here to kind of reflect back and think back and just think in your own personal situation. And we oftentimes saying that the reality is all of us can be millionaires because look at this. Let's just say you said on average, you earned $100,000 a year and you're early in your career, maybe you earned less than that. And then you kind of earn more than that later in your career. But over a 45-year career for a typical person, starting at 20 or so and retiring in their mid 60s, they would have earned $4.5 million, right? That's a large number. So when you're early in your career and in your life, it's easy to kind of look ahead and kind of guess that number and say, okay, that's what I think it's going to be. If you're a little bit later and you're my age and you're looking backwards, you say, well, that's interesting. What have I earned? And how do you figure that out? It's very easy to go to the Social Security Administration, pull up those numbers. You can see exactly what you've earned and average it, right? Because there's going to be good years and years that are not quite good. So again, as I said earlier, there's going to be a worksheet. You'll be able to do this later on for yourself. We're moving now into sort of what we call a very simple system. We call it the 3 buckets. And I'm going to kind of walk it through here in the next couple of slides. And I'm all about simple. So the reality is that how well you manage that first bucket, this green bucket, is going to really determine almost everything about your lifetime wealth. So here are the buckets. You have a 30-day cash and checking bucket. That's for daily, weekly, monthly cash flow, where it goes, expenses. You then have a 90-day bucket. This is also in cash and it's savings. And this is to account for things that might happen. So this is your initial savings bucket. Then there's this third bucket, which is 90+ day bucket. This is your investing platform, and ultimately you get to that as well. Right. So again, as I said earlier, how you manage this first bucket, this green bucket, has everything to do with how you're going to accumulate your lifetime wealth and how successful you're going to be. So let me explain. Whoops. Okay. So let's say your monthly expenses are around $4,000. The reason we have this yellow bucket in here is, again, that's what we call your reserve account. Ideally, you have 90 days worth of cash savings. So if you have $4,000 in monthly expenses, ideally this yellow bucket holds about $12,000 in savings. And why is it 3 months? Well, it's 3 months because let's say you lost your job. Typically, people can find another job within a couple of months, and that would get you through that time period. Or if there's a significant health issue, a significant expense, you can build it back up pretty quickly. So we like 90 days in a savings account. Again, in this example, we're going to go through $4,000 in expenses. You got to have $12,000 in that yellow bucket. So let's say that you make about $4,500 a month, and you get paid twice a month, on the 15th and on the 30th. You got $2,250 and $2,250. It goes into your green 30-day bucket. You have $4,500 in total income, $4,000 expenses, which means you have now, what, $500 left over. Where's the $500 go at the end of the month? You sweep it into your savings bucket until it's filled up. So if you start with 0, you're filling this up. You start to move the overflow into this bucket until it gets to that 90-day number there as well. Ultimately, when this is filled up and the $500 is left over, you move it into your 90-day kind of bucket. So the reason we have this 3-day bucket situation is because this allows us to instantly identify the problem. If there's no money ever flowing into the yellow bucket or the red bucket, then we have a problem in the green bucket. And what would that problem be? Well, is it too much month for the money? Are we spending beyond our means? Are there other issues happening there that we need to contend with? Are we overburdened with debt, in which case there's no ability to save? So by having this very simple system, within a few months, you're going to know very quickly, if you never get money in the yellow bucket, you got a problem here in the first bucket. right? And so the reality is, for any success in this to happen, you have to do what? You have to spend less than you make. I realize it's a difficult concept, but that's what it is. So ideally, these are flowing back and forth. You want these first two buckets to be very liquid. Ideally, you're at the same bank or the same institution. You can transfer money back and forth. And then this ultimately, we're going to spend more time talking about this third red bucket a little bit more down the road. So this is really only about discipline, right? And in 30 days, you sweep the yellow bucket, then ultimately you get to move money into the red bucket. The red bucket only opens up to those that have mastered the green bucket and the yellow bucket. Make sense? All right. So it's simple, but not easy, just like the choice between the apple and the donut. If you're like me, I would prefer to have that donut, but I know the apple is a little bit better for me. So it's really all about behavior and awareness and making good choices and making good decisions in your thinking. So we talked earlier, just very briefly, one of the questions was, so how does this all come together? I want to spend less than I make, and how do I get all this work? So this is an interesting way of thinking about it. So this blue line again is the make your money, and over time it goes up. Here's your spending line. Remember, that's the green bucket. So it's going down over time. The red bucket, that investment bucket, is your savings bucket and is growing over time. So what does that mean? In a perfect world, you'd be making more money and maybe spending less money or controlling your spending in another way so that the red line increases quicker and quicker and quicker. What happens when the red line crosses the green line? Well, we call that the freedom point. So the freedom point is where the money you saved is producing enough income, passive income, that it covers all your expenses. And that could be in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, or never. Don't know. But that's the objective for most people. And that's what we're kind of teaching. We're going to transition to some kind of key money dynamics and talk about some key ideas and strategies, not strategies so much as concepts that you really need to understand. You don't really need to know everything about money, but it's important to understand these basic things. Think of them kind of like laws, right? So they're basic laws. If you understand the basic laws of money and how money works based on time, return, and consistency. Again, you don't need to understand everything about money. Just understand the next few concepts and you're going to be well on your way. So compound interest. Compound interest, Albert Einstein called the eighth wonder of the world. And let me quickly explain how it works. I'm sure maybe you already all get it, but this will be a quick refresher. So simple interest is this. You have $100, you're earning 5% on it. So at the end of the year, you have $105, right? Then the next year, you get another $5 and so on and so forth. So simple interest is the same amount of interest every year that gets paid and is added onto it. At the end of 5 years, you've got $125. Compound interest is different. Compound interest is you start with $100, you earn your 5%, so you have $105, but now the entire $105 is earning money, right? So, oops, the entire 100, whoop, my mistake. The whole $105 is earning money, so now after $110.25, at the end of 5 years, it's $127.63. Now, you may not think that $2.63 is a big deal. It's a huge deal. It's about everything that we're going to teach here. So let's look at kind of a different example. We talked earlier about maybe thinking about a 45-year career. And many people want to become a millionaire by the time they retire. If you're willing to if you're willing to save and save consistently, you will be a millionaire. And it doesn't take as much money as you might think. But if you think about that 45-year career, and maybe you earn between $3 to $4 to $5 million over a career, and you're thinking, well, gosh, if I want to save $1 million, and I earn $3 million in a lifetime, that seems like a significant amount. But let's really look at this $100 a month over a 45-year career and bring compound interest into it. If you take $100 a month, it's $1,200 a year. Over a 45-year career, it's $54,100. So that's the money over here. When you think about that $54,000 divided by maybe a $3 million lifetime income, that's really only 1.8% of the money you have to save. So let's look at it here. If you earn 5% on $100 a month, a 45-year career, you're up to $205,000. At 7%, $386, 9%, $760, and at 11%, $1.5 million. I will tell you that over time, most people earn between 8 and 10% on their investments, on average over long periods of time, right? So realistically, someone would become a millionaire on only $100 a month over a 45-year career. But let's say you don't feel confident in earning that, 10%. Well, you could obviously double your savings. You could look at $200 a month for a 45-year career. That now becomes $108,200, which is now 3.6 of your earnings at $3 million over a lifetime of earnings. And now let's look at the money. 5%, 410, 7%, 772, 9% gets you to 1.5, and 11% gets you all the way up to a little bit over $3 million. So you're going to be a millionaire somewhere in here, maybe 7.5 or 8%. Pretty powerful, right? So compound interest is the first concept. Next is a rule of 72. And we love this rule of 72. You may have heard it before, but if you have not, then what it really does, it helps you figure out the time for your investment to double. And so the way this works, you essentially take 72, you divide it by the rate of return. So let's say that your rate of return is 10%. The rule of 72 is 7. It'd take you 7.2 years to double your money, right? So at 10% divided by 72 is 7.2 years. And if it was lower, let's say it's 2%, it's going to take you 36 years to double your money. So return is also very important. Now this works for you or against you. If we think about a lifetime of earnings, your money potentially will double over maybe 6 or 7 times, depending on your rate of return. So achieving good rates of return is really important. But as I said, it works for you or against you. So let's think about a credit card. Let's think about a $10,000 debt on a credit card. Credit card debt might be around 20%. So $10,000 doubles to $20,000 in just 3.6 years. So the rule of 72 work for you or against you. It's important to know that the first million is the most difficult one to achieve. If you're young and you have plenty of time, it's a little bit easier, obviously. But let's just kind of walk through this example. Let's say you're able to save $250 a month, you're going to earn 8%. It's going to take you 41 years to get to that first million. If you can save $1,000 a month, it's going to take you about 25 years. Now, maybe you're saying, well, that's great, John, but I'm not 20 and I don't have any chance in doing this quickly. It doesn't matter. It's just an idea. It's a concept, and you got to start where you got to start. You can't worry about the past. And the most important thing I want to teach you is that you can tell your kids and you can tell your kids' kids, right? That's all okay, right? So that's the first million. So again, using our 250 number, we say it takes 41 years to get to the first million. The second million now takes 8.5 years. We're still adding the 250 to it, but now we've got the second million in 8.5 years. Guess what? The third million is the easiest, 5 years. So why is that? That's because of compounding interest. Compounding interest gets you there quicker. You get big numbers as they build up, you get there quicker and quicker and quicker. All right. By the way, look at the $1,000 you got there quicker as well. All right. So I love this next little story. Hopefully you can all see that. All right. So this is a story of Billy, Susan, and Kim. Now I can tell you that I've taught portions of this lesson at my kids' high school several times, and this I think resonates with many younger adults, and I think is very, very powerful and a very simple lesson to kind of understand. So Billy understands the time value of money, and he knows that there's a cost to waiting. So he's 15 years old. He has a paper route. He saves his Christmas money. He saves his birthday money, and all that kind of great stuff. So he's got $3,000 a month that he saves. He saves $3,000 a month from age 15. He's earning 10%, and he saves it for 5 years. So he's got $15,000 investment. He does nothing else. He stops saving at 19, goes to college, has a great time, works his whole career, spends all his money. He's got $1.6 million of that original savings, right? Susan hears all about what Billy's doing. She goes, hey, that's pretty cool. I should start doing this as well. But she's in high school, she doesn't want to work. So now she's going to start working when she's in college. So she's 19 years old and she works a part-time job and she saves $3,000 a year for 8 years. So again, $15,000, $24,000. And then she doesn't invest ever again either. She's got $1.5 million at the age of 65, when typically most people want to retire by. So Kim hears about this. She goes, oh gosh, I should be doing this as well. And now she's waited till she's 27. So over here, she starts at the age 27. She puts $3,000 a month in investing and savings, but she does it for her entire career. She's got $1.3 million, right? So who would you rather be, Billy, Susan, or Kim? And it doesn't matter where you are in life. The point is save and start saving. And you got to be consistent, right? If Billy missed just one $3,000 payment, maybe the first one, maybe the last one, if he missed any one of those $3,000 payments, he would reduce his balance from $1.6 million to about 1.2. So being consistent and sticking with the plan is obviously really important. I want to remind you again, if we don't have the time, because I'm in my 50s, it doesn't matter. We can teach this to our kids and their kids. I talked earlier about how important, the doubling is, that over a, long career of working and investing, you might have 6 or 7 doubles based on the rule of 72. So let's talk about that last double and how important that last double really is, and how important it is maybe to have money to start with. All right, so $100,000 at a 10% investment will grow to $200,000 in, go back to our rule of 72, earning 10%, divided by 72 takes 7.2 years for it to double, right? So in year 20, we got, let's say we're 20 and we have $100,000, it becomes $200,000 in 27 years, 34 years. By the time we're 48, it's up to $1.6 million. And by the time we're 55, it's $3.2 million. And by age 62, it's $6.4 million. That's the $100,000 initial investment, you're doubling, at 7 different times. But what happens if we didn't have the $100,000? So this lesson is really about understanding how important it is to maybe have some upfront money to do it. So start at year 0, and it would take the first 7 years to save $100,000. Here it goes, right? So we go up to $100,000, $200,000, doubling again to 4, doubling to 8, 1.6, $3.2 million. But what if you started with $100,000? So on year 1, we started with, on year 0, we started with $100,000. It doubles in year 7 to $200,000, 4, 8, 1.6, 3.2, 6.4 in year 42. Right, so that $100,000, that last double from 3.2 to $6.4 million was very, very powerful because it was front loaded with the $100,000. Over here, it would take another 7 years to get there. And I'm not saying you have $100,000, but let's say that you're a young adult and you get an inheritance, or your parents or grandparents give you some money. Rather than blowing it and buying something else with it, consider this option. Take the money and invest it and allow it to double and become a multimillionaire by the time you retire. We're going to move into a little bit more of my area and Cal's area, which is debt and borrowing. And so these are lessons we teach our clients as well, but we're going to talk a little bit more now about debt and borrowing. So we're going to talk about what is borrowing, what is a borrowing bucket, when do we borrow, and how to borrow smart. So what is borrowing? Borrowing really is having an immediate impact. You're borrowing money from a later date and you're bringing it forward and you're spending money right now. So it's going to have immediate spending power today at the cost of reduced future spending power, because of course you must pay back that money with interest on the money you make in the future. Make sense? So if you borrow money, you're spending it today at the cost of paying it back later on. So you really think about it as if you're borrowing from your future self. So we have a well-known celebrity, we'll call him Justin. We don't know what Justin's going to look like later on, but if you think about it in your own perspective and say, okay, well, here I am today, I'm going to borrow money from wherever, a credit card and so forth. I'm going to have to pay it back from my future self. So there's his future self over there. We're going to bring the 4th bucket into the concept now. So the 4th bucket, we already know what our 30-day bucket is. It's our cash, our checking. We have our reserve bucket, our 90-day bucket. We have our investing bucket that flows over when we fill the first 2 buckets. Now we have our borrowing bucket, okay? So let's just say you borrow $1,200 at a 10% interest rate. What happens? Well, we know. So again, you borrow here, it goes into your 30-day bucket. So now there's $1,200 in this 30-day bucket. You have $1,200 to spend today. That money moves into that first bucket, like we said. But what happens? You have to pay back that $1,200 plus interest from your future earnings. So now you have an obligation. Another way of thinking about this is that you now have a little bit of a leaky bucket. That first bucket becomes a little bit leaky, and I'll explain why. And it's due to that future obligation. So let's say that you borrow, again, this $1,200 over here, and your rate is 10%. Your payment's $35 a month. It takes you 41 months to pay it back. So you pay back the $1,200 plus you pay back the $219 in interest to borrow the $1,200 you did originally, right? It's going to take almost 4 years to do that. But let's say that you couldn't even borrow money at 10%. It was 21%. $1,200, it's a $40 payment. It takes you 43 months to pay it back. You may say, well, $5 is really not a big deal, but look at the interest. It's significantly more, $516 versus $219. So anyway, we're going to stay focused on the $219, and now let's see what kind of happens to it. So the reason we call it kind of this leaky bucket is because now that $35 payment is due every month. So what happens? There's less money in the green bucket, which means there's less money to flow over into the yellow bucket, which means there's less money to flow over into the red bucket. So at $35 a month, ultimately it's going to return $1,400 over into the borrowing bucket. So again, you got $1,200 to spend today, but you got to pay back $1,419, including interest from your future earnings. And that money comes out of your green or your first bucket. We're going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of debt. And really, I've kind of broken it down into bad debt, neutral debt, and good debt. So when should you borrow, right? And when should you borrow and when should you take on this debt? Ideally, you never do anything with bad debt. So what is bad debt? Bad debts are really credit cards, personal loan, and payday loans. There are things with typically higher interest rates and things you might use to purchase a depreciating asset. So think about what would be a depreciating asset. It'd be things like, you know, maybe a really nice sweater for some reason you wanted, or maybe it's a new television that you want to get. So, right. So what happens when it depreciates, you walk out of Costco with that TV that was $1,200, you know that the next day that TV is worth $600 because no one's going to buy it from you. Right. That's just what it is. Sorry, I just said it. All right, just want to make sure it wasn't a chat there I need to look at. All right, so that's a depreciating asset, right? That makes sense, right? So credit cards at the end of the day are for convenience only. Personal friends, if you need to borrow money in this area, ideally go get it from friends and family, and they're charging you 0% if you can get away with that. Payday loans are never, ever, ever, do not ever take a payday loan. Now, many of you probably understand this. If you're going to use credit cards, pay them off every single month, but find a high reward credit card, ideally one with no annual cost. Put all your spending on that credit card and then pay it in full every month. It helps you in a couple of different ways. It helps you build credit. It provides rewards sometimes. Maybe it's cashback rewards, maybe it's travel rewards, maybe it's discounts on other items. So there's some kind of rewards. And of course, it helps with tracking. So what I mean by helps with tracking? Well, typically credit card companies give you a very detailed statement. You can put it into different categories and you know exactly what you're spending on food and clothing and different things like that. And provides some insurance. And what I mean by insurance, well, because sometimes you just don't have the cash. And so it provides you a little bit of safety net that you might need if there's a significant expense that you didn't anticipate as well. But it's really for convenience only. Neutral debt. Neutral debt would be typically auto loans, really the kind of only thing that kind of falls in here. So the reality is why I call it neutral debt is because for most of us, you have to have a car. You know, most people are not taking public transportation. It's not all that convenient, unfortunately, and so forth. And the rates are typically pretty low, but cars are also a highly depreciating asset. We know that the minute you drive a new car off the lot, it loses anywhere between 20 and 40% of its value very quickly. So the strategy here should really be auto loans, save and pay cash. And keep in mind that every year you keep an older car, you maximize its durable value to you, and you delay higher expenses, right? So if you can keep an older car going and it's not costing you a ton of money, that can be a good strategy. When you do need to buy a new car, think about new to me. Buy a car that's 2 years old. There's great lease returns, and it's challenging right now. The market is tough. There's not a lot of used cars or new cars, but nonetheless, you know, when things return to whatever normal is going to be, you know, when buying new, think new to me. I will never buy a new car again in my lifetime. All right, so what's good debt? Good debt would include things like student loans and mortgage loans. And you'll see I have there investing in yourself. So student loans make sense because you're investing in yourself. Sometimes we'll come back to that in a moment. And you're, you know, ideally getting an education so you can earn more money later on in life. Mortgage loans are also kind of an investment in yourself because you're thinking about buying real estate. You're paying yourself, you're paying your own mortgage to someone else's mortgage. You have to have a place to live, and it's really a container that you can live your life in. There's other social benefits and so forth as well. So mortgage loans are also considered good debt. Sometimes they're tax deductible and so forth. So essentially you get them if they're a low interest rate. Again, good debt would be a low fixed interest rate. and if you can buy an appreciating asset with it. So some of the strategies around here, so student loans, only if a justifiable ROI, return on investment. Going to school for 14 or 15 years and getting advanced degrees in things that may not pay you a lot of money do not make a lot of sense. It's not a justifiable ROI. But getting a college degree and something that's going to provide you with a good career and a good living would make sense. That's a good investment. Mortgage loans, you want the longest, lowest rate. And so down here we said, think about your student loans, and any kind of personal education doesn't necessarily have to be for college. It could be for certifications or postgraduate work. Make sure it's a good ROI and you can justify that expense. Now we need to look at renting as well, because some people argue that renting is cheaper than buying, and oftentimes it can be. Let's look through this. So let's say we bought a $300,000 home. We took on a $250,000 mortgage at 4%. The payment would be about $1,424. You have that mortgage for 30 years, you'd make $512,000 in payments. And of that $512,000, you'd have $262,000 in interest expense. So you say, well, gosh, I could rent that same house and I could have a less payment, which is true. You wouldn't have to take on a mortgage. And we'll assume that even the payment stays the same for 30 years, which is really unlikely. So if that was true, you have a $450,000 payment over 30 years, but more likely this is going to go up, in which case this might be more like $600,000. But nonetheless, we're going to assume it's the same. And let's look at what happens with appreciation. Remember, when you're buying a home and you're getting a mortgage, you're doing it primarily as a place to live, but also because there's appreciation. And we're going to use the same 4% appreciation. So that $300,000 home over 30 years turns into $973,000. You would have made payments of $512,000. So your gain is $460,000, but it's 30 years later, and now the home is paid off. So the home is now worth $973,000. If you'd rented that entire time, you'd have made $450,000 in payments and have nothing to show for it. So when you really look at this, this is almost a $910,000 difference in wealth accumulation based on this pretty simple, straightforward scenario. So one of the things that Cal and I do every single day is to help clients figure out these kinds of questions. And we call it a total cost liability analysis or bar smart analysis. And so these, again, the conversations that we get to do throughout the day, and we help clients kind of figure out strategies to maximize the ideas we've gone through and to maximize, ideally, your wealth. We're going to finish up today with a module around understanding credit, right? So we're going to go through what is the game of credit, what is the object, what are the rules, what are the key concepts, and then we're talking about next steps with credit as well. All right. So the most important thing to understand around credit is the awareness. Are you playing the game of credit? And we're going to ask you yes or no. You may or may not realize it, but you are absolutely playing the game of credit, whether you understand it or believe it or not. You are playing the game of credit. We all are every single day. Do you have a choice whether or not to play? Unfortunately, you do not. Well, you have a choice to play or not, but you can certainly have to pay attention to it all the time and keep moving forward. Will my performance playing the game have a financial impact? Absolutely. It's going to have an impact on your financial outcome. Can I know how well I'm playing the game today? Yes, you can. There's a way to keep score in this game. Can I learn how to play a better game to win? And of course, that's yes as well. So what is a credit score? So this is really the scoring model around credit. So a credit score, or FICO score, is a 3-digit number used to evaluate the risk associated with you. It's specific to each individual person. The most widely used credit scores are FICO. FICO stands for Fair Isaac Company. This was developed back in the 1960s. They have multiple different modules and proprietary things they sell to different industries. There's one for the mortgage industry, one for the insurance industry, one for the car industry, one for the credit card industry, and so forth. So the credit scores tend to run between 350 and 850. There are other scores out there called Advantage scores. These are typically used by other consumer-facing things like Credit Karma and so forth. They're not the same as a FICO score, although they use some of the same modeling to kind of get to the score. They just don't match the same as the FICO score. So what's the score really mean? Well, the score really means what's the likelihood to a lender of you becoming 90 days late. And we'll see here that if you have a credit score above 800, the odds of you becoming late are about 1,200, almost 1,300 to 1. right? So that's pretty good odds. Someone would feel pretty good about lending you money if the odds were really, really low that you were going to default on that mortgage. Now, if you drop down here to 720, now the odds increase to 323 to 1 that you're going to default on it. Still pretty great. Most lenders would take that risk. You start dropping down here into the 660 range, now it's 38 to 1. You drop down to 600, it's 14 to 1. I mean, it's pretty likely that someone down here at 500 is going to actually default on their debt, right? So lenders just don't take those kind of risks. And if they do take the risks, what do? They charge you significantly more interest rates on those kinds of things, right? So here's we kind of call it excellent credit score, great, good, and so forth. And then down here under really 600 is just bad credit. So the game of credit is played individually, but couples use the lowest credit score for their team. So in other words, if you are in a couple, there's a husband and wife or a partner or spouse, whatever you want to call it, you know, the score, even though one might have an 800 credit score and the other might have a 600 credit score, because it's a team game, the lender is going to look at the 600 credit score. And the reason they do that is because the risk. If the person with the 800 credit score was to suddenly not be in the picture, and passed away, got divorced, left, whatever it would be, then that debt is remaining with the person with the low credit score, so that increases the risk. That's why they look at the lowest credit score for a team. So what's the object of this credit game? I think you might understand what it really is. It's to achieve the highest possible credit score, to minimize the overall cost of what? Well, your credit score affects your borrowing, things like your mortgage, your auto credit, college loans, business loans, everything are impacted by that credit score. It's become a very easy way for a lender to evaluate who you are and your likelihood of repayment. It can affect your investments, things like life insurance, auto insurance, homeowners insurance. Oftentimes those companies are pulling credit reports. You may or may not even know about it as part of the application process. They pull a soft report and they get to see what's going on in your world. Utilities, more and more utilities are now looking at credit and determining if they should allow you to have an account. Cell phones and your gas and electric utilities. Then credibility. Employers also oftentimes use credit evaluations in the mortgage business. Anyone who enters the mortgage business, they run credit reports on to determine how they've managed their own personal credit in the past. So things like employment, background checks, and public records, all of those have to do with credibility. So having a poor credit score in any one of those areas is going to affect you financially, but it could also affect you because maybe you can't get the job you want. So you can't earn the money you want. So you can't start the savings when you want to do all that and build up the wealth you want to. So it's a very big game. 80% of Americans have one or more errors on their credit report. That's a big number. So it's important to look at your credit. You can go to what's called annualcreditreport.com. Again, annualcreditreport.com. It's a free service offered by the bureaus. You can pull your own credit for free one time a year from the 3 different bureaus. So, and just check for errors. 40% of Americans are paying a higher mortgage payment due to lower than necessary credit scores. So we have a number of clients that unfortunately whose credit scores are not perfect. And so they pay a little bit higher on their interest rates for those mortgages. And over a 30-year period, it's a big number. 25% of Americans have credit report problems that would prevent them from securing a new loan or even new employment. Again, big number. All right, so on the right-hand side, we have this chart. It kind of talks about a $260,000 30-year mortgage and the cost of that interest. So if you're down here, you got the best credit score, the cost of that interest is maybe about $17,000. And as you kind of go up through the different tiers to worse and worse credit, all of a sudden the cost of that interest goes up significantly. So the same house, the same borrower who never improved their credit over time, over 30 years of borrowing in the exact same house is almost $1.1 million between having a really good credit score and having a really poor credit score. So again, it's a very big game, a lot of money involved, and any dollar that goes to other lenders because he's lower than credit scores is a dollar you don't have in your buckets to kind of move it across. And did you know that 70% of your ability to access your house money is now tied to your credit score? Lenders look at multiple different factors when they're choosing whether or not to give you money, but the very first factor is the credit score. And if you don't meet that criteria, you're out of the game before you ever start. So let's talk about what does not affect your credit score. There are a number of things that don't affect it and that people don't always understand. Things like education does not affect your credit score. The years you've lived in a single location. Your income does not affect your credit score. Late payments less than 30 days don't impact you. Late utility payments, they're fine until they become a collection. Bounce checks don't impact your credit score unless they become a collection. Rent history, is okay. It's not reported in it unless you become evicted and becomes a collection account. Child support or alimony does not affect credit score unless you don't pay it on time. Your age, race, religion, nationality, gender, or marital status, job, occupation, or employment history, nothing to do with credit. Inquiries you make in your own credit report and inquiries an employer makes in your credit report do not affect your credit score. So what does affect your credit score? A lot of stuff over here. There's actually 22 different criteria. Your payment information, public records like judgments and liens and collections, the amount that's past due, the duration account that's past due, the amount that's past due. So the larger the balance, the worse it is. Recency of the past due items, so how recent they are, the number of them, the number of accounts in good standing. You want to have a good number of accounts. We're going to show you the strategy in a moment. Amount you owe on individual accounts, the type of balance you carry, the number of accounts with balances affects you. The utilization rate, we're going to talk about a little bit more in a moment. The balance as a percentage of the original amount borrowed, average time it's open, the time since it's been opened, time since last activity, the proportion of new to old accounts, number of inquiries, the time since the last inquiries, prior problems, and the mix of your different credit types. The mix would be things like you have a mix of car leases or loans, personal loans, mortgage, lines of credit, credit cards, and so forth, car loans. That's a different mix. So knowing what does and does not affect your credit score is obviously a big part of playing the game. So those 22 criteria become 5 different rules. And so this pie chart breaks down the different stuff. So the highest weighted number is the payment history. So 35% of your score is made up of your payment history. Obviously, good payment history is better. Utilization rate is the next one. So what is a utilization rate? Utilization rate is the percentage of the available credit that you're using. So let's say you have a $10,000 credit card and you have $5,000 balance. That would be a 50% utilization rate. Make sense? So in an ideal world, you want to be under 30%. So if you have a $10,000 credit card, you want your balance to be under $3,000. 0 is better, but under 30% is your next threshold you want to cover. Next is 15% is the length of time. So the longer you have credit, the better. The type of credit you have, so having a good mix of credit, and then inquiries. Don't have inquiries unless you know you really need to borrow. So you can affect about 80% of your score by simply understanding these 5 simple rules. So the 5 simple rules are this, right? Make all your payments within 30 days of the payment date. Pretty obvious. Utilization rate, we just talked about that. Keep your balances under 30% of the high credit limit. If you need to, sometimes it's important to increase the limit on a credit card because that reduces the utilization rate. That $5,000 example I gave you before, 5,000 versus 10, is 50%. But if you have $5,000 up to $20,000, now it's 25%. Length of history, keep your accounts open and active. Don't close old accounts, pay them off, make sure they're 0 balance, but don't close them. Keep at least 5 active accounts at all times. A lot of people are debt adverse and they have no accounts open. Inquiries, keep your information private. Make sure no one's checking into your credit. So kind of obvious stuff. So thank you for that. We have a few moments for questions, but I'm gonna tell you what's gonna happen next week. So if you didn't catch it, we're gonna finish up the last 4 modules. Next Friday, same time, same bat channel. We're going to talk about clarifying taxes. We're talking about IRAs and 401ks, qualified savings. So now we're talking about the red bucket. We're talking about inflation considerations and how important inflation is, which right now is in the news a lot. We know this inflation, we know it's not transitory, and we know it's affecting us every single day when we go out to the grocery store or to a restaurant. And then we're going to put it all together with what we call the PIN-FIN system. PIN-FIN stands for personal independence number and financial independence number, right? So it's a great little spreadsheet. It takes a few minutes, and we're going to have a challenge at the end of all this and encourage you to complete your PIN-FIN. All right, so I'm going to come off the sharing now. I'm going to open up my video, and if anyone has questions and would like to jump in, we certainly have a little bit of time. And if not, and hopefully you can come back next week. I'm going to, just so you know, if for some reason you can't make it next week, just drop me an email. I'm going to keep doing the class kind of every month. We're going to move it to maybe some different times. I'll do some in the evenings. I might do it on the weekends. But this is going to be an ongoing project for me, probably for the foreseeable future. But I'd love you to come back next week, check out the last 4 modules, do the PIN-FIN challenge. But if you can't, just let me know. I'll drop you an email. We'll come in the next class. So any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
I'd like to know when you talked about income, compound interest, what type of accounts you need to have to earn in compound interest?
Yeah. So most savings accounts now at banks and financial institutions are now compounding interest. Most investments are as well. So kind of almost anything you can run into these days is now compounding interest. Simple interest would be typically would come up where maybe you lend money to somebody. Maybe you take out a trust deed and it's paying you 5% interest, and and you get that just the same check every single month. So you give them $10,000, they send you back $500 a month every month. So that's not compounding, that simple interest. But if you make investments in stock accounts or savings accounts and mutual funds, those kind of things, those are all compounding now.
Okay. And I don't seem like I'm asking so many questions, but
Don't worry, it's okay. Lena, what you have to know, everyone else has questions too. They're just letting you ask them.
Okay. Just in talking, I heard you talking about utilizing money and how you would, when we was talking about cars, and it made me think about leasing a car. Is that a bad thing to do, lease a car?
Not necessarily. Leasing a car is not typically as good as owning a car, because obviously you don't own the car. There's a factor of money involved in leasing a car. So we typically recommend not leasing a car if you don't have to, but there may be situations where it could make financial sense. You just have to look at what's called the money factor on the lease. And if it's low enough, it could make sense. But generally speaking, I would tell you to buy a car rather than lease.
Because I thought about that.
Now, there might be times, and let me clarify.
And I know that it depends on what type of car you're leasing. If you just leasing a, I don't know how to say it. I don't want to say it the wrong way. Just like a Toyota, just say, I've learned that if you lease a Toyota, if you lease something like that, you actually pay for it twice. But I mean, if you're trying to lease something that's kind of like a high end and everything, and two, sometimes I just think leasing is kind of not a good thing, because even if you lease a high end car, and if you add up and calculate what you spend within the 3 years of well, I guess 3 years is not as bad as 4 years, but 4 years or 5 years, 5 years, you almost bought that car too, understand?
No, you're absolutely right. I was just going to add another time where it may make sense to lease the car is if you own your own business, right? We talked about the entrepreneurship. So if you own your own business and you can write it off as a business expense, you could justify lease in that situation because it's part of your business expense. And if it's necessary for the operating of your business, and it's a deduction, then that could also make sense.
Can I comment?
Sure.
So I'm always very opposed to leasing cars. And I just leased my very first car, actually first new car I've ever owned. And I did it because of two reasons. Like John said, it was a perk for my business. But secondly, they had this new program where it's lease to own. So instead of putting all my down payment up front, and I know it still sounds like the residual payment at the end, but it still financially looks a little bit better than just a straight lease where at the end of it, you give back your car. This is a lease to own where I didn't have to put my down payment up front, but I have X amount of months until I give that down payment, and then I'm going to be owning my car. So they gave you both options. And if I change my mind, I don't have to own the car. I can just carry on with the lease, if that helps at all.
Okay, that sounds good. That's interesting.
John and Cal, I have a follow-up question about that. Are you aware of a good online calculator or some way of calculating whether it makes sense for us to lease? I do own my own business.
I'm not aware of one. Cal, have you run into one? I haven't really seen one.
I do have an online calculator. His name is my CPA. So I called him like in a panic because I'm telling you, it was a big decision for me. I'm just putting it out there. And I called him and he said, you know what, Cal, it makes sense to lease it. And then should you choose to buy it, that's going to make sense also, just the way that we set it up. It made a lot of sense. So call your accountant; he'll tell you.
But Nina, I think you could write it off, so you could probably expense it out within the businesses anyway. So
fair enough. Even if the thing I've always struggled with is that we generally buy our cars, we pay them off in 4, maybe 5 years, and we keep them for 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, good.
That's sort of why.
So under those circumstances, I wasn't sure if it's actually worthwhile, but it sounds like the answer is go talk to your CPA, and Peter will tell me.
And then too, a reason why I thought about leasing at one time too, because usually if you pay, after you pay 4 years for a car, all of it's like it breaks down. You have to pay a lot of maintenance and all of that. And I just say, oh, maybe I just lease one car, you know what I'm saying? And then that way, at least I have a decent car that I could depend on going somewhere instead of, I don't know, and stuff. But like you say, if you can write it off, I guess it depends on the circumstances.
Yep.
But I had another question, and I was trying to look at my notes, and the question was that I would like to learn more about in this class is taxes. How a lot of people don't, well, in my business, a nonprofit, I don't pay taxes, but still in my personal taxes, I just want to know and learn how do you not pay so much taxes? Because a lot of people who got a lot of money, they don't pay a lot of taxes. How does rich people? I don't want to be rich. I just want to be comfortable and everything.
That's the $1 billion question.
But how do you do taxes with that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Lena. We are going to talk about taxes next week. It's not going to go into a lot of strategies about how to avoid paying taxes.
I don't want to not pay taxes, but I'm just saying, I just know some people, I don't know. I just leave that there because I don't know how to ask that question. So
you need to call Donald Trump's accountant, apparently.
Yeah.
But there are strategies, and having a good, it gives me the opportunity to say how important it is to have a good team around you. And having a good CPA and those kind of advisors is actually critical to building wealth too, because any legitimate tax deduction and any dollar you don't have to give the IRS that you can legitimately not give the IRS is money that goes back to filling your bucket. So I wholeheartedly agree with you.
Yeah, I don't want to not pay tax. I just want to know how I don't have to pay so much taxes.
No, absolutely. So anyway, that's where a good CPA comes in. And again, we'll talk a little bit about it next week, although there's no specific strategy that says how to reduce it. There's a little bit of stuff on how to reduce it, but not a lot.
John, I had a question.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Tisha. So I'm not sure if you answered some of this with Lena's previous question, because I feel like maybe I zoned out for a second while you were talking about that. I was wondering, with the savings for 10%, you're saying like you tend to get about 10% earnings on your savings. Is that something you'll be talking about next time?
We will talk a little bit more about that red bucket. So generally speaking, the 10% figure comes from what the stock market has returned in a balanced portfolio over years and years and years. The stock market was up 27% last year. Right. So now that was an anomaly. It's not always up 27%. It could be down 10%. But over long periods of time, having a diversified portfolio, of stocks, bonds, cash, alternative investments, all those things, has returned close to 10%.
Okay, so we're talking like that kind of investment, not just your typical like savings account.
No, that's right. Yeah, savings account, as we all know, are paying very little these days. Right. When you get up to those 8, 10 kind of numbers, you're either self-managing money or you're working with an advisor to get up to those kind of numbers. That's correct. Unless for some reason inflation continues to go and suddenly CDs are paying 10% again. But if that happens, there's much bigger problems in the world. Right.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that.
So it's the mutual funds is not as good as the investing in stock or anything.
No, mutual funds are stocks. Yes, there are mutual funds, ETFs. We'll talk just a little bit about that. Ultimately, we may expand this series and start digging into some of those details and have a financial planner that comes on and talks about some of those ideas as well.
I have one more question. You was talking about the scale you laid out about, being a certain age, saving money. I'm about to be 60 on the 28th of January. So have I waited too late? Because if I count up 45 years to try to do something, I think I've kind of waited too late.
No, you're great where you are, Lena, and congratulations on your birthday coming up. That's one day before my birthday, so that's great.
Okay, good.
So I don't think it's ever too late. The reality is it's important to save money no matter where you are. You're young, you guys have a great business. And, the reality is you're still saving for your future, right? You have many, many years in front of you and there's no reason to look back. We're always looking forward. And if you can you guys have done a lot of work in the last year to put yourself in a stronger financial position, and it's just going to continue to get better. So I say it's never too late to start saving. Keep saving.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I really enjoyed this training. I think it's really interesting. And I tell you, I just felt just this fact of working with you last year just gave me so much joy and just so much, I just love it and everything. And I don't even think that, I just wish I had known you guys before last year and everything.
So do we, Lena, but that's okay. We know you now, and that's great. So thank you. I appreciate your kind words.
Yeah, and I appreciate everything too.
All right, you guys. Well, thank you very much. We're going to sign off now, but I appreciate your time. Have a wonderful weekend, and we hope to see you all next Friday. Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.